happy to be here. I um I chose the title of this conversation with you all well before I had actually formulated my thoughts. And the word turbulence was the word that I thought that we could center on as it relates to what's happening in the markets, in geopolitics, what you're facing, getting your products from farm to market, if you're a farmer, if you're an input supplier, and a processor, etc. As we go through this conversation, you'll see just because it's such a timely topic, I may be changing the word turbulence to something a little bit more extreme. But before we get started, I wonder if this is, oh, there we go. Um, I want to take a moment for a reflection. So I'm going to make you a little bit uncomfortable. That's okay. That's kind of my style. If you would be willing, place your hands sort of in a relaxed position, relax your shoulders. Um, Take a moment, close your eyes. If you're not there with me, then just get into kind of a reflective moment. And I'm going to share some words with you. Just just ponder on them. I believe in the future of agriculture, with a faith born not of words, but of deeds. Achievements won by present and past generations of agriculturalists, in the promise of better days through better ways, even as the better things we now enjoy have come to us from the struggles of former years. I'll say it again. I believe in the future of agriculture, with a faith born not of words but of deeds. Achievements won by present and past generations of agriculturalists, in the promise of better days through better ways, even as the better things we now enjoy have come to us from the struggles of former years. Okay, open your eyes. How many of you have heard that before? What am I quoting? The FFA Creed. Thank you. The first stanza, the first paragraph of the National Future of Farmers of America, the FFA Creed. Why would I quote that? Well, you see, we share a connection here. I live at the moment in Minnesota. I grew up on what they would call the left coast, the Salinas Valley of California. I've worked on the East Coast in Washington, D.C. for 18 years of my career. I've lived a little in China, a little in India. But North Dakota holds a special place, and North Dakota holds a special place in my heart. Because every January during college, the third week of January, as I was working for the National FFA organization, former state officer in the state of California, I would fly to different states. Every, third week of January, I would fly here to North Dakota to present development conferences, youth development conferences for the North Dakota Future Farmers of America. Now, why did I, the California gal, draw the straw to come every third week of January to North Dakota? I do not know. It's divine intervention, and I'm here again the third week of January in North Dakota with all of you. And maybe some of you were in the room back then. This is 20 some odd years ago. But we share a common connection, whether you've been in the FFA or not. We can all back up for just a moment and realize that what you do, what we do, is about the future of agriculture. And if we don't have that faith in turbulent times, what are we here for? So my message today is meant to, in some ways, educate on some of the things that I see and that I may know. Some ways to have a conversation. Some ways to just instill some faith, right? And come up with some good ideas on how we navigate these turbulent times. Now, some of you have asked, so I'm not trying to advertise, but I do think it's important that I let you know where I'm coming from. I founded a firm 6.5 years ago after leaving the leadership team, the C-suite of a small family-owned company called Cargill. I had been at Cargill for about 15 years, handled the international portfolio. I like to say I've been peddling food in my, whether it was in the government or in private sector, I've been peddling food across borders my entire career. So 6.5 years ago, I decided to found a company focused on two things: sustainability and trade, and helping companies manage risk and moving things across borders. just 2 weeks ago, we renamed the company from it was called Devry BV, Sustainable Strategies. We've been on a journey to explain ourselves. We're called Steward versus Strategies. Steward versus the etymology of steward is steig weird, to be a safekeeper of the whole house. And verse is to turn toward. So being a safekeeper of the whole house, that's how we approach our conversations with businesses. Is that really what we're about is not to isolate and come in and say you got to do things better, you got to be more sustainable. It's how can we not only help you be a safekeeper of a good financial steward of your business, but also a steward of the inputs that make your business run, natural resources, nature, and people. So that's who we are. And we take the risks that you all face on environmental risks that are, regulations that come at you, expectations from the marketplace. We take those risks and we actually reformulate them into these are can feel like constraints on you, right? You've got the consumers asking you to do more and show more and be more transparent. And we take those constraints and we try to expand them into opportunity to increase your opportunity set. So the natural environment, what the consumers or people are expecting in the supply chain are not at odds with the business, but actually help advance the business toward profitability. So I was walking the floor and people were asking me, well, okay, fine, I'll come listen to your speech, but define sustainability. And I threw this slide in last night because I do think it's important. I do think it's important. There is no real definition. This is my definition and what guides me every day, which is we know that business solves problems in society. Business is set up to solve some of the most audacious problems in society. Business does good things for society. Farming does good things for society. Agriculture does good things for society. We know the positive attributes that business brings to society. And at the same time, we know that there can be negative impacts for business as well. So sustainability is about assessing and understanding all those positive externalities that business creates, and also being a truth seeker to say, where do we need to do better? We know we may create some negative externalities and negative impacts on society. That's how we define it. It's as simple as that. What's the positive? Where are some negatives? And how do we mitigate the negative impacts of business on society? Now, ESG, environmental, social, and governance, has been something that in the last, let's just say 6-8 years, has been demonized. This is the big, the bad, the ugly. This is something we actually do. ESG stands for environmental, social, governance. That is about measuring and taking accountability, simply categorizing those impacts that business has into environmental, social, and different governance indicators. So it's a measurement tool. This is how we look at it. And I can bet that any one of you has been in a situation, whether you're talking to a customer or a consumer, where they say, well, what is your footprint? What's your carbon footprint? What's your water footprint? What's the measuring that is what the ESG indicators are. So when you see it out there as it's big and it's bad, I'm going to talk to you about this and how it relates to trade and your license to operate in the current moment. But I thought that I would put this out here to kind of put the breadcrumbs together. Now, a lot of folks know me and have known me for my career as the trade guru, the international trade guru. In fact, I started early on in my career in Washington, D.C. as the sugar trade analyst for the United States government at the U.S. International Trade Commission. Sugar, ethanol, cocoa, confectionery, all natural sweeteners analyst. So when people approach me and they say, could you come talk about trade? And I first start with sustainability, you might think I'm going like this. I did not set out to be a sustainability executive. I did not set out to do that. I set out to change the world by ensuring that markets stay open for food and agricultural goods. So you might see this as a diversion. But actually, what I'm going to talk about today in terms of managing the turbulence is that they are actually one and the same in many ways in terms of you being able to get your license to operate. So I've defined what we've experienced over the last 20, 25 years in trade as what's known as the convergence era. this is my terminology, so go with me, right? Today on this stage, I am introducing what I believe trade has what you've experienced in trade and in your business as the convergence era. Okay, the convergence era is that trade and sustainability, the food security agenda, especially post the 2008 food price spikes, and the climate agenda is all converged. That's what you've been experiencing, is this giant sort of mashing up of all of these agendas taking place at the same time. Yet when I came into Washington, I was focused on trade. My first job was at the World Bank to work with developing country negotiators to implement the Uruguay Round Agreement on agriculture. And it was about trade in food and agriculture. And something started to take place in the early 2000s, and actually in 2005, when we were trying to get the second global trade round, the Doha development round, at the Hong Kong negotiations, we were trying to get it across the line. And it was very clear to me, this isn't yesterday's trade round. The activists had taken hold of the global trade agenda, and actually organizations like Oxfam and others who had been against trade stood up and said, we're actually for trade. They stood on the stage during the rounds and they said, except that we want it to be done a certain way. And so that is when you started to see the environmental agenda and the developing countries asking for exceptions, sort of that people side, that social agenda make its way into the trade agenda. And so what happened is, we have not had in the United States of America a comprehensive global trade deal, whether it's global or even another trade agreement, since 2015. What happened was, because we couldn't get our agreements across in the global sense, we started to do regional and bilateral agreements. And I've listed a lot of those here. This is what we did during that vacant space because we couldn't get a global trade round. Now, the Trans-Pacific Partnership was an agreement that was negotiated across 13 different economies. It was U.S. led. I led the U.S. Business Coalition to get the Trans-Pacific Partnership across the line. Highly comprehensive agreement. The Democrats weren't for it, the Republicans weren't for it, and it was thrown out the door. So we have a vacant space in terms of our ability to have preferential access to these Asia Pacific economies. But this is what's gone on since 2015. And then the convergence, where I started to go, okay, wait a second, I've been working so hard on trade, and all of a sudden over here, there's another agenda, which is the climate discussions, okay? And because we couldn't get anything done in the global trade rounds, and because the climate agenda was really ramping up, most of the conversations were taking place in the climate discussions. And in 2015, to sort of kind of mix in all of these other issues, the sustainable development goals were launched, really audacious goals globally, like zero hunger, life below water, right? Really important things that we believe in and we're trying to achieve as business and as governments, etc., to make sure that the quality of life is raised and living standards are raised across the globe. So you're getting this focus now from businesses, especially, to say, okay, how are we incorporating all of this into our business models, and then asking our suppliers to report on their climate actions, on their sustainable development actions, etc. This is the pressure you've been receiving. Now, what happened through all of this, and I'm going, this is an interesting point, is Mike Bloomberg comes along, savvy businessman, and says, you know what, I see all the corporations are having challenges because there's no standard for sustainability, and they're being expected to sort of infuse all of these and report in their businesses. They created something called the Sustainability Accountability Standards Board. And SASB is what you've been up against, frankly, is trying to find a way to standardize how businesses talk about sustainability. And then that folded into the asset managers then saying, okay, we are going to require, if we're going to invest in companies, we are going to require that they meet these standards. And so that's when they started to bring the ESG together. And because they wanted, and asset managers, insurance companies, bank lenders, they want to know what risks you're carrying on your balance sheet as it relates to environmental risks or social risks or even governance risks. So at the same time, what was starting to come online is the smart agriculture agenda. All right, let's take a deep breath. That's a lot. So this is what you've been up against in the convergence era: the trade agenda, the sustainability agenda, the food security agenda, the climate agenda, and the ESG. It's all converging like a giant tornado. I sound like your therapist, right? Okay. So out of all of that came innovation, efficiencies, new ways to do things, more sustainable ways to do things, new investments in businesses and technologies, results, actual results, right? Different trade associations started to measure, started to figure out what are our farmers doing. As I worked with the US Soybean Export Council, for example, around their sustainability protocols so they could access Europe. So lots of good was coming out of this: new businesses, partnerships, and new markets. At the same time, it's been a very uneven space, an incredibly uneven space. No standards are harmonized for you all. And the capital, this is my big, if I had a soapbox, I'd stand right up on it right now and say, this is my soapbox. There's been a gross misallocation of capital to the wrong things instead of the right things. And I'll give you the one, okay, for example, bringing mastodon DNA to make mastodon meat, as opposed to taking that capital and investing it over in the very people who are having to toil the soil and actually perform on things like regenerative and sustainability. So we have a gross misallocation of capital as it relates to sustainability. You're on reporting overload, regulations have smashed all together, and there's a lot of places and spaces, which is why I founded the company, small and mid-sized enterprises who we focus on, that don't have the in-house expertise to keep up with the big folks, to keep up with the consolidators, to keep up with the global multinationals, right? So really what you're facing here is sustainability is about your license to operate, and it is really important in trade to get your products across the border and to meet the expectations of your customers on the other side, or even to get through the government veil. Let's talk about the desire to access the European market, for example. Okay. So this right here is what the larger consumer branded companies, this is how they think about solving for the bigger risks and constraints in their supply chain. This is the Consumer Brands Forum out of Europe. Large global multinationals are members. And over time, this is how they sized up their risk. Everything from product data risk to healthy food waste, plastic waste, forest. Are we sourcing from land that has been deforested? Net zero, are we reducing footprints? Human rights issues, sustainable supply chain, and global safety initiative. So all the expectations that are being placed on you in the supply chain are coming under pretty much this veil here. The brands have been driving in the convergence area. The brands have driven the convergence, right? Brought it all together: trade, sustainability, the climate agenda, food security, everything under this very well categorized effort. So that's the convergence era. What I came to talk to you about then is, now that we know that history and we've lived it and we are living it, we are now going into what I'm defining as the turbulence era. So it's all still converged, but at the same time, it's just not one bump anymore. Okay. So you're looking at things and you're going, wait, I thought I got it all together over the last 15, 20 years. And now you're telling me that I'm actually up against an entire weather system that is eroding the rules-based trading system. Okay, so trade has turned, and I put the word in here this morning, ultra political, because it's always been political. You put me on stage to talk about trade, I talk about policy. It can be interpreted as politics, right? Because it's always been a sensitive issue in the United States of America. To get a trade deal across the line, it was never overwhelming. It was always a sliver of a subset of Republicans and Democrats that crossed the line. It's an extremely political topic in the United States. And so it's now ultra political. Tariffs are shifting, and those are threatened tariffs, and those are also the ones that are being applied, right? So there's a lot out there. We're going to tariff this, we're going to tariff that. All the threats in and of themselves actually have an impact on trade, even if they're not coming to fruition. Foreign aid markets are disappearing. Okay, that was a really startling change about a year ago. And we're retreating from climate accords. I'm not placing any judgment one way or other. I'm stating it as fact. Okay, so you're seeing this turbulence starting to take place. And there's a global realignment. I'm a nerd. Yesterday, I watched President Trump's entire speech and intervention at the World Economic Forum. And I also watched over dinner Prime Minister Mark Carney's speech at the World Economic Forum. I highly recommend you watch both of those, okay? This is the one that gives me the greatest grief because I know the power of trade to driving business, both on the export side and on the import side. When you have Prime Minister Carney now explaining that the global rules-based trading system is over and redefining a subset of actors called the middle economies, we now know what we're up against, that there is a new geopolitical reframing of markets. And so the politics are fracturing the markets. All the phenomenal work that has gone on, and I've seen it by the ag community and the ag coalition over the years, all of the trade missions, all of the times we've been to the WTO to get the standards right and get a level playing field. We're now realizing it's fractured, and we've got to figure this out. We've got to figure out how to manage the turbulence. There's wars. I throw that in there just so that we don't oversee that, right? Which have really created some changes in the food economy. Rules-based no more. And sustainability, the buyers are still asking. So we're still inheriting that giant convergence that I talked about. And they're asking for proof. And by the way, there's now some shifting consumption patterns. And we saw some presentations around what's happening on the sugar and the sweetener side. And there's also, I brought my beans hat, right? My sustainability analyst said beans are having a resurgence. And she said, Devry, say on stage, make beans cool again. Well, beans are cool again, right? And so if you're growing both, you're facing this dichotomy. How do you maximize the value of your land? Beets, beans, corn, all of these other things, right? So the health expectations of consumers is one that's really going to drive, I believe, major structural shifts in our food and ag economy. So now let's take a tariff reality check, because actually when I got the phone call to come, I was asked, Devry, could you talk about tariffs? Could you talk about trade? And could you talk about food aid? And here I am just giving you a broader, wider net to think about. So let's do a tariff reality check. What's going on with the tariffs? Now, these tariffs have become less of a technical trade instrument and really more of a multi-purpose tool. We've even seen them used to say, gee, if you don't support me on our political interest in Greenland, for example, we will put tariffs on. So it's no longer, the trade agenda that I inherited as a really optimistic utopian viewed free trader when I got to Washington. They're being used in different ways, and some of it is quite successful. It's increasing volatility, and the businesses can't figure out like what the rules often are because it's not stable. And even when a tariff isn't aimed at agriculture, we know this, agriculture takes the brunt of some of the tariff volatility and the tariff war. And I threw this in here at the bottom. I'm being quite nice, room for discretion, or what we call cheating of the tariff. What I've experienced around the world is when there is uncertainty about a tax or how you actually, do I apply an ad valorem tariff or a specific tariff? And is this product properly classified? It leaves room for corruption. And so when there is uncertainty on, well, what does this product act, what is the actual tariff? There's lots of room for cheating and corruption. Okay. So this is an example. Gee, you all didn't do anything to India to deserve a 30% tariff on pulses. But because what happens in governments, and we did this at USTR when I worked there, if you really want to retaliate, what happens in governments is they get the list of, all right, where are all those places and spaces where I know that these products and these organizations have political clout, right? So we would do it when we were in a trade war with Mexico on, oh, let's just say sugar and tomatoes and pork. You would never really hit them on the exact product. You would go around and go, where am I going to create the most pain so I can get them to actually come to our side? So unfortunately, you're a group of incredibly influential, successful people who are suffering the brunt of the tariff war. So now let's switch over to a reality check on the trade agreements and enforcement. And what I'll tell you, at the outset is, while the tariffs get slapped and then it forces countries to come to the table, and you're seeing headlines, oh, an agreement's been reached with Taiwan, an agreement's been reached with South Korea. These are not formal trade agreements. These are trade agreements, but not under the formal structure that our trade agreements follow by going through Congress and Congress's role in foreign commerce. However, they are agreements. Now, the reality, and I've got some clients, and I'll be in DC next week. The reality is that the second the agreement, some of these get announced, this is your game on. It doesn't mean it's a full agreement. Often, a lot of them are frameworks. Okay, a lot of them are frameworks, and so they're being negotiated super fast. And USTR is a mighty yet very small agency in the federal government. And so what happens here is, if you have your pulse, your finger on the pulse, okay, something's happening. We need to get in there and have a conversation fast. But you don't necessarily know if you're going to be on the agenda or not. But it does create openings for you. And we're using this opportunity. For example, I have a client out of Hudson, Wisconsin, who has a technology tool that goes into meat plants, very successful. And they've been trying for 20 years to get into Korea, 20 years. So this actually creates an opportunity to call their bluff on a technical barrier to trade. So not all is lost. And on sugar, knowing that I was the sugar analyst for the US government, and you can't negotiate a trade deal without hearing from the sugar industry, do not allow any more sugar into the market. This also creates an opportunity for you, because if you're seeing the overquota sugar coming in under the current, framework of just, the agreements that have been negotiated years ago. The last round was in 1992. You have an opening to go have that conversation with USTR. And this is where I believe sustainability comes in. Sustainability, accountability, fair trade rules. How are we so certain that the sugar that's coming in over quota has not been subject to deforestation, right? So sustainability does become a tool for you to say, if we're playing by the rules here, can we assure ourselves that the stuff that's coming in is also playing by the rules? So I put that out there for you for consideration to assess, because I got very deep into deforestation in my previous role when Greenpeace climbed an elevator of ours in Santarém, Brazil, and led me for a 15-year journey, or 12 to 15 years, to figure out how do you manage deforestation or anti-deforestation in a supply chain. So the news is not your best source for information on tariffs. We all know that. The news is not your best source of information on trade. So I wanted to present you with a few places you could go, because it's changing so fast. The Peterson Institute of International Economics has a very regularly updated site of what's happening. It categorizes all of the actions, and these are the actual actions, not the threatened ones, okay? And it'll tell you, okay, well, this skirmish is over trade deficits, or this skirmish is, and now it's actually turned into a deal. And then you can click over here and understand what the deal is. Okay. So if you really want a good source of information, and you're not wanting to just go for the threats, you want to see what's actually taken place, I highly recommend, from time to time going to the Peterson Institute and checking. The other thing is, and I asked Peter Harrell, I'm on LinkedIn all the time. Actually, for the last 10 years, it's been the best place to do business. So if you're on LinkedIn, please follow me. You'll see my conversations out there. You may or may not agree, but I follow trusted people who have been in the trade space for a really long time. Now, Peter said, yes, Devry, you can share this. He actually went through and he posted, because I hadn't had taken the time to do this, where have all the threats been that haven't come to fruition? And that's actually useful too, right? To say, all right, well, we've had a threat on any country doing business with Iran, but we actually haven't seen that play out, right? So there are trusted sources, and oftentimes I will share those of people who are following this, right? Policy, what I call policy wonks. That yes, again, it's political, and at the same time, you glean trusted information. So he went through all of these, and I reshared that. So if that's helpful. Now, I want to talk about the Supreme Court case because two days ago we thought there would be a decision on this, and the Supreme Court kicked, the IEPA tariffs, the emergency tariff protocol that the White House is using down the road. But it is coming. There will be a decision. We just don't know. And February 20th is the next day that they'll be issuing a bunch of different decisions. So it's important for you to think through and prepare. Either way, we don't know, are these tariffs going to be overturned? Are they going to be put in place? Or, like I always think, there's always a gray space. There's probably going to be a little bit of this and a little bit of that, right? So we'll have more certainty on these tariffs on February 20th. Now, food aid. You asked me about food aid. I put Bread for the World up here, urges an end to the pause on foreign aid. Now, as I've been talking with folks, I mean, I don't know how much this has hit the industry. I know that dried beans have been part of the food aid programming for some time now. Gee, what a great way to deliver high protein, you know, in a really, protein packed food to those who are suffering from chronic food insecurity. Bread for the World I put up here because I highly recommend, as you look to see how we get the food aid program back up and running, working with the faith community is very important. When I was in Washington, I joined something called the Alliance to End Hunger, which is a cross corporate, cross faith, cross nonprofit NGO organization that works on one thing: to lobby Congress on ending hunger. And Reverend David Beckman, who was head of Bread for the World, founded the Alliance to End Hunger. He's my mentor. He was the one who brought me on the path to say it is okay to carry out your faith in corporation and advocate for the end of hunger. And so I would highly recommend taking a look at what the faith-based organizations are doing to get that back on the docket. So because it's been a demand shock, it has been quite a demand shock for slivers of revenue that have come from food aid. All right, so that's the reality check. We've now gone through the convergence. We now know we're in this turbulent area with the reality check. What can I even say that could help you get a grounded advantage? Well, it's helpful to back up and say what is still true, right? What is very true in this turbulent area? Instead of being so focused on everything coming at us, can we get our grounding on what is actually true in the marketplace? 7 realities I've got here. One is we know people still need to eat. That's the most important truth. Trade is still a necessity, and while it will be reshaping, and I believe more regional or different blocks that are starting to take place, trade is still very important to the U.S. agricultural economy. We still have the comparative advantage in production, in processing, in distribution. That still exists. Responsible production is still an expectation from the branded companies, which drives it all the way back to the field. So that's not going away. Brands and retailers are still going to manage their reputational risk through procurement processes, which means you're on the front lines. And your commercial relationships still exist, even in places where our government may be combative with the Europeans. If you want to sell in any one of those countries, your commercial relationships are still there. Nothing is stopping you from going and continuing to maintain those. And government relations remains important. And I know both of your organizations, both of your industries have highly qualified government relations folks in Washington and in capitals around the world. So I want to leave you with 4 moves then. If we know that all of that still is, is our truth set, I'll give you 4. Anyone who knows me, I probably have 15 good ideas. Maybe one of these is helpful for you. Okay? The first move is sustainability still makes sense in the turbulence era. It still makes sense because the risk is still there. And if you understand those constraints to your business that your customers or the consumers are asking for, then you get the chance to measure that. And oh gosh, we got to measure. Here's my message on measuring. You don't know what value you have until you back up and bring your data together and measure it. Why am I in so many conversations with businesses that say, I don't want anything to do with this sustainability thing because I don't agree with it? And I say, fine, then why are you handing it to the person buying your product? Because you don't know what you don't know until you take the time to actually measure it. And through that, you find efficiencies. Okay. And when you find those, the waste is cost. Waste is, part of eroding profit margins. I have been super excited to see that some of our clients even find new revenue streams when they back up and they put themselves in the driver's seats of their business, they bring their data together and they start measuring their sustainability indicators just as much as their financial performance indicators. And they put them on one dashboard and they start to make decisions on, oh gee, is my carbon footprint going down per unit of production? Oh, is my water, etc. And then can I commercialize that? And many of us probably saw last week Microsoft, who is trying to find ways to buy up carbon reduction, just engaged in a huge contract with Indigo Ag on carbon sequestration, right? And so maybe that has some of our eyes glazed over. But what I say is that's an opportunity. And if you're not measuring or taking time to look at sustainability as an opportunity, you're not capitalizing on it. And I always say to farmers, do not forward sell your carbon. I'll say the same thing to processors. Don't forward sell it to a Nestle or to a General Mills or to a Cargill until you know what you have, because you don't know if you're being offered the right price. Brand differentiation is going to be important. So as you begin to look in on the sustainability side, it's these little efforts that you're making that add up to a grander conversation with your customers. And then market access, right? This is a condition of market access in many of the places and spaces you want to sell. Whether that market access is into a market like the EU or into a grocery retailer here in the United States. It's a license to operate issue. So that's move number 1. Move number 2, step up commercial diplomacy in foreign markets. We know that you've got folks that are overseas, focused working with Foreign Agricultural Service and others, working to sell products. Run your relationships by market. Start to figure out, do we need to tag certain people to different relationships, and then show up with the proof of the work you've done in your supply chain. And begin to create a diplomacy cadence, because it's that commercial diplomacy, that people to people diplomacy that keeps country to country relationships going when our governments are not getting along. My mother in 1984 went behind the Iron Curtain, which is about this tall, on a peace mission with a bunch of Catholic nuns to what is modern day Ukraine. And imagine how that sits with me to say, oh, I get it. We still have the opportunity to do business across borders. So step up your commercial diplomacy and build resilience through diversification, looking at different markets, and begin to size those up, because your market portfolio may need to change based on the turbulence. Move 3. This is keep pace with USTR and trade negotiators. And you'll say, yeah, okay, that's not practical. I'm not the one that does that, right? You're not. You've got teams in Washington that do it. But remember, it's a quid pro quo. It is I want this for that right now. And you really need to understand the trade-offs, because you could end up on the chopping block very quickly. And one thing that's really important with this is to work outside of the industry. What I mean by that is, if an NVIDIA brand can still do business in China, if Coca-Cola brand can still do business in China, if a Cargill brand can still do business in China, then it's certain that the bean growers can still do business in China, right? So make sure that you're staying abreast, and your brand is in front of these negotiators. Work with your men and women in district, and continue to use your relationships. And remember, and if you're worried, just give me a call. Oh, I saw this trade agreement just announced. It's the art of the deal. The negotiations are never done, right? Negotiations are never done. So the other thing to realize is this might be a short-term fix. It may not in the turbulence era, because these trade agreements may not transcend into the next administration. Okay. So my fourth, and I think I forgot to mention, I'm an agricultural economist. Specialization in public policy and international trade. You may not agree with me, but I'm going to recommend to you that in this moment of turbulence, while there's opportunities to engage with USDA and others around public policy, take the long view that you want the markets to work. You don't want it. I always say, look, you lock in a policy, it's called a policy lock. That thing might be locked in for 20 years. Now you may like that if you're on the winning side of that policy, but you might not if you don't want to be on that side of the policy. So take the long-term view when you're engaging with our public policymakers. Make sure the markets can still work. Become an active champion of trade agreements, even in the middle of everything that's happening. Support a level playing field on sustainable trade. I mentioned that earlier in the context of sugar, for example. Use it to your advantage. A little known fact is that the U.S. trade agreements have the highest standards in the world on labor and environment. It's never stated that way, but we already have the high standards that we're upholding. So make sure that that we don't throw those out because we think sustainability is icky. It's actually one of our superpowers, right? Because we have tough regulations on labor and trade. Humanitarian exemptions, fight for those as best you can. Fight for those as best you can. It goes to the first point I had on what is still important, is that people need to eat. In places like Iran, where we've got civil disobedience going on, or even in Cuba, for example, humanitarian exemptions allow us to ship food to the people when things are going awry with their governments. And it's always been the ag community who has fought for that. And robust foreign aid is something that fits squarely in our court. Continue to ask for more support, more financial support on market promotion, and on farm policy. I keep up. I listen. I'm concerned. I'm seeing a lot on different Instagram feeds and LinkedIn that we should go more toward managing supply. Go to Canada and ask people on the other side of supply management how that's worked out for them. The winners win, and everyone else doesn't. And supply management will constrain the innovator, will constrain the farmer who wants to do something different but gets caught into a supply managed situation. So I'm saying this, and maybe I'm not popular for it. It's a cautionary tale when we look at ag programs. And then the last one is comprehensive immigration reform. Immigration reform has been something that the ag community has been able to come together, whether you're from the state of California, the state of Maine, or here in the Midwest, to say we need a sensible immigration policy to ensure that we have enough laborers in our midst so that we can run our businesses effectively. So this is my sprint through the convergence era, the turbulence era, and trying my very best to give some good ideas on how you stay grounded during this turbulent time. Thank you very much. Yes, I'll take questions. Yeah. Okay, so I'm gonna mash that up. So the question is on ESG, lots of regs, lots of promises on premiums, and in foreign markets, do they have to hold up to the same standard? So I had somebody, one of my clients, the board chair, says to me, Devry, do you think that consumers are paying premiums for cage-free eggs? Okay, so it's like the gotcha question. And here's my answer: no, they're not. And at the same time, that doesn't matter, because if you want to sell into the largest economy, the fourth largest country in the world, which is California by economy, right? So sorry, I grew up there. It's not to be arrogant. Then you decide whether you want to meet those standards, right? Because that is the going in policy. And until it changes, that's your constraint, right? So the answer is no, not always. There's an expectation of consumers that we want this, and then when it comes to the price, they're not necessarily willing to pay. Okay. It's a really small segment of the market that may be willing to pay. So the answer on this is to figure out, when you're looking at that subset, which ones are onerous and which ones are we doing today and which ones should we, because we know we need to, to do something, should we march toward and um, become more, like I said, an advocate for the industry on, marching yourselves toward more sustainable. I do not believe that sustainable is actually appropriate. If I advise someone in the meat industry, I'll say, you can't say you've got sustainable beef. You can say you've got more sustainable. So you're right. You're spot on about that. There are consumers who are willing to pay. Your constraint is the regulatory framework, and it's onerous, and it's state by state. And so often what happens in industry is industry will march toward a harmonized set of standards, like we did on food safety at the national level. So you've got to decide, do you fight it all, every single one, or do you back up, take a deep breath, and say, okay, where will this work for us in a way that maybe we can actually get something done at the national level with harmonized standards on sustainability or ESG? So it sounds like a long-winded answer, but it is the pathway. Are other countries doing it? Not all of them, no. And that's why you need to really read our trade agreements. We have very strong labor provisions and very strong environmental provisions. Those are important for a reason. And then the accountability, the measurement, the transparency, that all has to come into play. The most pressure you're getting is not from the regulatory environment, it's from the brands. It's from the brands. So having conversations with the brands in a constructive way around, here's what we can do, and here are the things that just are not reasonable, unless, by the way, there's some investment. You can't carry the investment burden of delivering, right? So there's conversations that need to be had with the brands. That's squishy. I know. Let me know. I can help you knock the brands around. No, we love brands.
We got time for maybe one or two more questions. There's one.
One or two more questions. All right, so go with me on this. Take a deep breath. Find a comfortable seat. Close your eyes if you will, or just in some sort of reflective state, and listen to these words. I believe in the future of agriculture, with a faith born not of words, but of deeds. Achievements won by present and past generations of agriculturalists, and the promise of better days through better ways, even as the better things we now enjoy have come to us from the struggles of former years. I believe in the future of agriculture, and I certainly know you do too. So I hope on this really frigid day, I've been a bit of a bright spot to let you know I believe in you, and I believe in what we do collectively. Thank you very much.